She'd inherited her father's billion-dollar empire, but never his time, learning instead that the man who mopped her school's floors at midnight knew more about showing up than the man who signed her tuition checks ever would, until the day everything she thought she knew about family, loyalty, and worth came crashing down in a single devastating revelation. Jane Brooke sat in the hallway of Whitmore Academy's East Wing, her back against locker 247, watching John Michael work his magic on the eternally scuffed linoleum. It was 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday in October, and the building had that particular kind of quiet that only exists after the chaos has left, but before the loneliness sets in. The fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous song overhead, and somewhere in the distance, the debate team was probably still arguing about something nobody outside that room would ever care about. Welcome back, my amazing family and friends. If you're tuned in and excited for today's story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because tomorrow I've got another fascinating story coming your way that you definitely won't want to miss. Now let's get back to the story. You know what your problem is, John said without looking up from his mop, his voice carrying that particular rhythm of someone who'd found the perfect cadence between speaking and working. The mop swished left, then right, then left again, a dance he'd perfected over 15 years of keeping Whitmore's floors cleaner than most of its students' consciences. Jane looked up from her phone where she'd been scrolling through her father's latest Forbes profile without actually reading it. I didn't know I had a problem. Everyone's got problems. Yours is, you think money makes people disappear. John dipped the mop in his bucket, wrung it out with practiced efficiency, and finally met her eyes. His were brown and warm, with the kind of crow's feet that came from genuine smiling, not the Botox-frozen facsimiles she saw at her father's corporate events. But it don't make people disappear. It just makes them harder to see. That's very philosophical for a Thursday, Jane said, but there was no bite in her words. She'd learned months ago that sarcasm bounced off John like water off his freshly mopped floors. Thursday, Monday, Saturday. Wisdom don't take weekends off. He grinned, revealing a slight gap between his front teeth that somehow made him look both younger and older at the same time. Besides, you sitting here instead of riding home in that fancy car of yours tells me something's chewing at you. He wasn't wrong. Jane had dismissed Gerald, her driver, an hour ago, claiming she had extra studying to do. In reality, she'd received another text from Michelle, her father's assistant, informing her that Williams would be unavoidably detained in London and would miss their scheduled dinner. Again. This made it the fourth cancellation in as many months, but who was counting? Oh, right, she was. The thing about disappointment is that it gets easier with practice. The first few times her father had cancelled, Jane had felt it like a physical wound. Sharp, immediate, devastating. Now it was more like a paper cut. Still painful, but so familiar she barely flinched. She'd learned to expect absence the way other kids learn to expect birthday parties and bedtime stories. My dad cancelled dinner, she said finally, surprised at how steady her voice came out. But that's not news. That's just a Thursday. John stopped mopping. This was significant because John never stopped mopping. The man could carry on entire conversations, solve mathematical equations, probably perform surgery if needed, all while maintaining his perfect swish, swish, swish rhythm. But now he planted the mop handle firmly in his bucket and walked over to where Jane sat, his white gloves leaving small wet marks on the handle. He didn't sit down. John Michael was many things, but presumptuous wasn't one of them. But he did lean against the opposite wall, his navy blue polo shirt slightly darker at the collar from a day's work. Let me tell you about my daughter, Keisha, he said, his voice taking on that storytelling quality that meant Jane should pay attention. When she was about your age, 14 going on 40 like all you kids are, she stopped talking to me for 2 whole months. Wouldn't say more than morning and night and pass the salt. Made my wife crazy, made me crazier. What happened? Jane asked, tucking her phone into her blazer pocket. This was how John worked. He'd tell you about his life, and somehow you'd end up understanding yours better. Turned out she was mad because I missed her track meet, had to work a double shift because Johnson, he was the day custodian before Rodriguez, his wife had a baby, and I covered for him, so I missed watching Keisha come in third place in the 100-meter dash. John shook his head, and even now, years later, Jane could see the regret flicker across his features. Third place, out of 30 girls, and I wasn't there. What did you do? First thing I did was apologize, not one of those "I'm sorry but I had to work" apologies, a real one. I told her I was wrong for not finding a way to be there. Then I asked her to forgive me. Then, and this is the important part, I showed up for every single meet after that, even the practices, especially the practices. Jane pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around her plaid skirt. My dad doesn't even know when I have things. Does he know you want him there? The question hung in the air like dust motes in the afternoon light streaming through the hallway windows. Did Williams know? Had she ever actually told him? Or had she just assumed that fathers were supposed to know these things by some sort of parental osmosis? When had she stopped asking and started accepting? I used to tell him, Jane said quietly, when I was younger. I'd tell Michelle to put it on his calendar. Piano recitals, science fairs, that stupid father-daughter dance in 5th grade that I ended up going to with my uncle who spent the whole time on his phone anyway. And he'd promised to come. Then something would come up. A merger, a crisis, a meeting that couldn't be rescheduled. After a while, I just stopped asking. She looked at John directly, surprised to feel heat behind her eyes. It's easier when you don't expect anything. John was quiet for a moment, and in that silence Jane could hear the buildings settling around them. Somewhere a locker clanged shut. The heating system kicked on with its familiar groan, life continuing in all its mundane glory, while she sat here trying not to cry about a father who'd probably forgotten her birthday last month until Michelle reminded him. You know what's easier than not expecting anything, John finally said. Being brave enough to expect something and dealing with the disappointment when it don't happen, because at least then you're living, not just existing. That sounds exhausting. Oh, it is. John laughed, the sound rich and genuine. Being human is exhausting, but it beats being a robot, which is what you turn into when you stop feeling things. Before Jane could respond, the sound of expensive heels clicking on linoleum echoed down the hallway. Both of them turned to see Victoria Ashford Prescott, Whitmore's newest student and already its most notorious, strutting toward them like the hallway was her personal runway. Victoria was 15, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never heard the word no and wouldn't recognize it if she did. Oh, how adorable, Victoria said, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that preceded poison. Jane and her janitor, having their little heart-to-heart. Should I get you 2 matching friendship bracelets? Jane felt her jaw tighten. Victoria had been targeting her since her first day at Whitmore 2 months ago, seemingly threatened by Jane's quiet refusal to compete in whatever social hierarchy Victoria was trying to establish. The fact that Jane actually talked to John, that she treated him like a person instead of mobile furniture, particularly seemed to offend Victoria's sense of order. Actually, Victoria, we're discussing philosophy, Jane said coolly. But I wouldn't expect you to recognize intellectual discourse. It doesn't come with a designer label. Victoria's perfectly glossed lips twisted into something that might have been a smile if smiles could cut. Intellectual discourse with the help, please. My father says people like him, she gestured vaguely at John, are practically invisible. Service industry ghosts, no offense, she added to John with a smile that was all offense. John straightened up from the wall, and for the first time Jane noticed how tall he actually was. Not just tall physically, but tall in that way people got when they were completely comfortable with who they were. He looked at Victoria with an expression that wasn't anger or hurt, but something far more dangerous. Pity. None taken, he said evenly. Your father sounds like he's missing out on knowing a lot of good people, but that's his loss, not mine. I know who I am. Question is, do you? The words landed with the weight of truth, and for just a second, Jane saw something flicker behind Victoria's carefully maintained mask. Uncertainty, maybe, or recognition that she'd just been outplayed by someone she'd tried to treat as beneath her. But Victoria recovered quickly. She tossed her hair, extensions Jane had overheard in the bathroom, but expensive ones, and turned to leave. Whatever. Some of us have actual lives to get back to. Enjoy your floor time. As her footsteps faded down the hallway, John picked up his mop again, his rhythm unbroken. "That one's hurting," he said simply. "That one's awful," Jane corrected. "Same thing usually. Happy people don't need to make other people small." He resumed his swish, swish, swish pattern. "Besides, she called me the help, like it's an insult. I help keep this place clean and safe for all you kids. What's insulting about that? I'd rather be useful than useless, which is what half these rich folks are." Jane smiled despite herself. This was peak John, turning what should have been a moment of hurt into a philosophy lesson. "You really don't let anything bother you, do you?" "Oh, things bother me. I just don't let them change who I am. Big difference." He paused in his mopping and looked at her seriously. "You know what your father's missing, Jane. It ain't your recitals or your dinners or your milestones, though he's missing all those too. What he's missing is you, the actual you, the one who sits in hallways talking to custodians and doesn't care what snobby girls think, the you that's kind and smart and sees people. That's what he's missing. And one day he's going to realize it, and it's going to hurt him more than it hurts you right now." Jane felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, but opening, like a door she hadn't known was closed. "How do you always know the right thing to say?" "I don't. I just say what's true and hope it helps." John grinned. "Plus I got 3 teenagers at home." "You think you're complicated? Try having twin 16-year-old boys who just discovered cologne and think they're God's gift to the female population." Jane laughed, the sound surprising even her. "That sounds horrifying." "It is. My wife says our water bill doubled from all the showers and our air quality went down from all the Axe body spray. But they're good kids. Knuckleheads, but good." His expression softened. "And they know their dad loves them because I'm there. Not perfect, not always on time, but there. That's all any kid really wants." The hallway had grown darker as they talked, the October sun setting earlier each day, casting long shadows through the windows. Jane stood up, brushing invisible dust from her skirt, and picked up her leather bag, a birthday present from her father, or rather from Michelle, since Williams had been in Tokyo for her actual birthday. "Thanks, John," she said, and meant it more than he probably knew. "Any time, kid. That's what I'm here for. Well, that and keeping these floors clean enough to eat off of, though I wouldn't recommend it." As Jane walked toward the exit, she heard John call after her. "Hey, Jane?" She turned back. "Don't give up on your dad just yet. Sometimes people get so lost in what they're doing, they forget why they started doing it in the first place. Maybe he just needs reminding." Jane nodded, not trusting her voice, and pushed through the heavy double doors into the cooling October evening. Gerald was already waiting with the car. She'd texted him during the Victoria encounter, and she slid into the back seat with its leather interior that still smelled new. As Gerald pulled away from Whitmore Academy, Jane watched John through the window, still mopping, still humming one of his Motown songs, still being exactly who he was. And she made a decision. She was tired of being the kind of daughter her father could ignore. She was tired of accepting absence as normal and disappointment as inevitable. John was right. She needed to be brave enough to expect something, to demand something. She pulled out her phone and opened a new message to Michelle, but instead of acknowledging the dinner cancellation with her usual, "Okay, thanks," she typed something different. "Please tell my father that I need to meet with him. In person, it's important. And please tell him that if he cancels, I'll know exactly where I rank on his priority list. Jane." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, her heart hammering with the audacity of actually asking for what she deserved. Behind her, Whitmore Academy grew smaller in the window, but John's words stayed large in her mind, being brave enough to expect something and dealing with the disappointment when it don't happen. Because at least then you're living, not just existing. Jane Brooke was tired of existing. It was time to start living, and that decision, made in the back of a luxury sedan while a custodian mopped floors a mile behind her, was going to change everything. Williams Brooke's office occupied the entire 47th floor of the Brooke Capital Tower in Manhattan, a gleaming monument to excess that could be seen from practically anywhere in the city. The view was spectacular, 360 degrees of urban dominance, from the Hudson River to the East River, from Central Park's green expanse to the Statue of Liberty's distant torch. Williams had paid an obscene amount to have the windows specially treated so he could see out perfectly while no one could see in. Privacy, he'd learned early in his career, was the ultimate luxury. He stood at his desk now, not sitting because he'd read somewhere that standing desks increased productivity by 17%, scrolling through market reports on one screen while a live Bloomberg feed played on another. His third monitor displayed his calendar, color-coded by priority, red for critical, yellow for important, blue for everything else. He didn't have any blue appointments. Williams Brooke didn't do everything else. His phone buzzed, the special tone he'd assigned to Michelle, his executive assistant of 12 years. She was the only person whose calls he always took, mainly because she filtered out 99% of the noise that tried to reach him daily. "Michelle," he answered, not looking away from the Tokyo market numbers. "Tell me it's good news about the Yamamoto deal." "The Yamamoto deal is proceeding as expected, Mr. Brooke, but I'm actually calling about Jane." Williams paused, his finger hovering over the keyboard. Jane, his daughter, 14 years old now. 15. No, definitely 14. Her birthday had been last month, September. He'd sent something nice. Michelle had handled it. "What about Jane? She's not in trouble, is she?" The question came automatically, the default concern of a parent who knew he should be more concerned but wasn't quite sure how. "No, sir. But she sent me a message about tonight's dinner cancellation." Michelle's voice held that particular careful neutrality she used when she was about to deliver news he wouldn't like. "She wants to meet with you, in person. She says it's important." Williams glanced at his calendar. Tonight was completely full. Dinner meeting with potential investors from Singapore, followed by drinks with a senator whose committee was considering financial reform legislation. Tomorrow wasn't much better. Next week was insane. "Can we reschedule for next month? I'm completely underwater here with the Yamamoto situation and the—" "Mr. Brooke," Michelle cut him off, which she almost never did. "She said if you cancel, she'll know exactly where she ranks on your priority list." The words landed like a slap. Williams actually looked away from his monitors, which might have been a first in months. She said that? Word for word. Williams was quiet for a moment, watching the city pulse below him. From this height, people looked like ants, scurrying about their insignificant lives. He'd worked for 20 years to get above them, to look down rather than up. But his daughter's message made him feel distinctly like he was the small one. "What do you think?" he asked Michelle, which was another rarity. Williams Brooke didn't usually ask for opinions. He paid people to execute his decisions, not question them. Michelle was quiet for a beat too long. "I think your daughter is 14 years old and brave enough to tell you she needs you. That's not a quarterly earnings report, Mr. Brooke. That's not going to wait for a more convenient time. You're saying I should cancel the Singapore meeting. I'm saying you should decide what kind of father you want to be. The rest is logistics." Williams felt an unfamiliar sensation in his chest, something like guilt, but sharper. When had Jane stopped being his little girl and become this person who sent pointed messages through assistants? When had she learned to weaponize her disappointment? He thought back to the last time he'd actually seen her. Really seen her, not just passed her in the hallway of their Tribeca penthouse on his way to another meeting. 2 months ago. 3? She'd been sitting at the breakfast bar doing homework, and What had he done? Ruffled her hair, asked how school was. The memory was frustratingly vague, like trying to remember a dream. "Clear my schedule for tonight," Williams heard himself say. "All of it. Including the Singapore investors. Tell them I have a family emergency, because apparently I do." "Yes, sir. Should I make a reservation somewhere?" Williams considered this. A restaurant would be public, full of people who might recognize him, waiters interrupting every 5 minutes. He needed to actually talk to his daughter, not perform being a father for an audience. "No, tell Jane I'll be home by 6. We'll order in. Her choice of food. I'll let her know." Michelle paused. Mr. Brooke? This is the right decision. We'll see, William said. But after he hung up, he stood at his window for a long moment looking out at the city he'd conquered, while somehow losing track of the one person who actually mattered. Jane received Michelle's message at 5:17 p.m. while she was in the back of the car heading home from school. She read it 3 times, certain she'd misunderstood. Your father will be home at 6 p.m. tonight for dinner. He's cleared his entire evening to spend with you. He asks what you'd like to order in. She stared at the screen, waiting for the follow-up message. Never mind, something came up. Or, actually, he'll need to reschedule. But no other message came. Williams Brooke had cancelled the Singapore investors. For her, Jane felt something she hadn't felt in years when it came to her father. Hope. And hope, she immediately recognized, was dangerous. Hope was what got crushed. Hope was what made disappointment hurt worse. Everything okay back there, Miss Jane? Gerald asked from the driver's seat, his eyes finding hers in the rearview mirror. My dad's coming home for dinner. Gerald's eyebrows rose. In the 3 years he'd been driving Jane, Williams Brooke had never come home for dinner. Gerald had probably started to think the man was mythical, like Bigfoot or honest politicians. That's wonderful news. Yeah, Jane said, but she couldn't quite make her voice match the sentiment. Because what if he still cancelled? What if he showed up but spent the whole time on his phone? What if he came home but wasn't actually there? She texted back, Thai food, from that place on West 4th. Then she added, and tell him I said thank you. Because even though she was scared to hope, even though every instinct told her to protect herself from disappointment, John's words echoed in her mind. Being brave enough to expect something and dealing with the disappointment when it don't happen. She was going to be brave, even if it killed her. Williams arrived home at 5:53 p.m., which was practically a miracle given Manhattan traffic. He'd had his driver break several traffic laws to make it happen, but he'd made it. The Tribeca penthouse was exactly as he'd left it that morning, pristine, modern, expensive, and completely devoid of warmth. His interior designer had called it sophisticated minimalism. His ex-wife had called it living in a luxury morgue. Jane was sitting at the kitchen island, still in her school uniform, doing homework. She looked up when he entered, and Williams was struck by how much she looked like her mother. Same sharp intelligence in her eyes, same way of holding herself like she was braced for impact. Hi, she said simply. Hi. Williams set down his briefcase, suddenly unsure what to do with his hands. When had talking to his daughter become this awkward? Food should be here in 20 minutes. Okay. Silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Williams could negotiate billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, could stare down hostile board members and win, but standing in his own kitchen trying to talk to his 14-year-old daughter, he felt completely out of his depth. How was school? He finally asked, immediately wincing at how generic it sounded. It was school. Jane closed her laptop. How was work? It was work. Williams attempted a smile. We're not very good at this, are we? No, Jane agreed. We're really not. But then she smiled too, just a little, and Williams felt something shift. Maybe they didn't need to be good at this immediately. Maybe they just needed to start. You wanted to talk to me about something, he said, pulling out the stool next to her. Something important. Jane's smile faded. She looked down at her hands, and Williams noticed she was wearing a bracelet he didn't recognize, woven thread in blue and gold, Whitmore's colors. Yeah, she said quietly. I did. I do. I'm listening. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Williams Brooke actually meant it. Jane took a breath, the kind that fills your lungs completely before you jump off something high. She'd rehearsed this conversation 100 times in her head on the ride home. But now that her father was actually sitting here, actually present, actually waiting, all her carefully planned words scattered like dropped papers in wind. I don't know you, she said finally, the words coming out more blunt than she'd intended. And you don't know me. We live in the same house, we have the same last name, but we're basically strangers. who occasionally pass each other in hallways. Williams felt the words land somewhere uncomfortable in his chest. He wanted to argue, to defend himself with the arsenal of excuses he'd built up over the years. He was building a legacy for her, providing for her future, ensuring she'd never want for anything. But looking at Jane's face, so serious and so young all at once, he realized those excuses would sound exactly like what they were, justifications for absence. "You're right," he said instead, and watched Jane's eyes widen slightly. Apparently she'd expected a fight. "I've been telling myself I was being a good father by making sure you had everything you needed. But I confused providing with parenting." "Why?" Jane asked, and the question was so simple, so direct that Williams didn't have an easy answer. He stood up, walked to the window that overlooked the Hudson River. The water was dark now, reflecting the lights of New Jersey across the way. "When you were born, your mother and I were barely making ends meet. I was working as a junior analyst, pulling 18-hour days, trying to prove I belonged in a world that kept telling me I didn't. We lived in a studio apartment in Queens that was so small, your crib was in our bedroom closet." Jane had heard vague stories about her parents' early struggles, but never in detail. Her mother had died when she was 6, breast cancer that came fast and mean, and afterwards, her father had become even more distant, like grief had built a wall he couldn't climb over. "I remember holding you when you were maybe 3 days old," Williams continued, his voice softer than Jane had ever heard it. "You were so small, so fragile, and I made a promise that you would never struggle the way your mother and I struggled, that you'd never worry about money or opportunity or whether you could afford to chase your dreams. So you chase money instead of being my dad?" The question was harsh, but Williams didn't flinch from it. "I thought I was doing both, but somewhere along the way, the money became the goal instead of the means. I kept telling myself, just one more deal, one more quarter, one more year, and then I'll slow down. But there's always one more. That's the trap. There's always something else to acquire, some other mountain to climb." Jane came to stand next to him at the window. From 47 floors up, the city looked beautiful and manageable, but she knew that up close it was chaotic and complicated. Kind of like people. "There's this custodian at my school," she said. "His name is John Michael. He makes $12 an hour mopping floors and unclogging toilets. He has 3 kids, a wife, and drives a 15-year-old Honda Accord that he says runs on prayers and optimism." Williams glanced at her, curious where this was going. "He knows everything about his kids, not just the big stuff, but the little stuff. He knows his daughter likes her eggs scrambled, but not if they're too wet. He knows his twin sons are obsessed with some video game I've never heard of, but they play it together every Sunday morning. He goes to their school events, coaches their teams, and shows up even when showing up is inconvenient." Jane turned to look at her father directly. "He's there. And you know what? His kids worship him. Not because of what he gives them, but because of who he is to them." The comparison stung precisely because it was accurate. Williams had built an empire, commanded respect from world leaders, and moved markets with his decisions. But a custodian making $12 an hour had something Williams didn't: his children's time and attention freely given. "You think I'm a bad father," Williams said. It wasn't a question. "I think you're an absent father. There's a difference." Jane's voice wasn't angry, which somehow made it worse. Anger he could have handled. This calm assessment of his failures was harder to take. Bad fathers hurt their kids. You just don't see yours. The doorbell rang, their Thai food arriving. Williams went to get it, grateful for the interruption but dreading the return to this conversation. They'd crossed some invisible line, said things that couldn't be unsaid. He could either retreat back into his comfortable distance, or he could step forward into uncomfortable truth. He chose truth. They set out the food on the kitchen island: pad thai, green curry, spring rolls, mango sticky rice. Jane had ordered enough for 4 people, probably out of habit. How many dinners had she eaten alone in this enormous penthouse, surrounded by food and luxury, but devoid of company? "Tell me about John," Williams said as they ate. "The custodian. What makes him so special?" Jane considered this while chewing a spring roll. "He sees people, really sees them, not what they can do for him or what they're worth, but who they actually are. There's this girl at school, Victoria, who's awful to everyone. She tried to make fun of John, called him the help like it was an insult, and John just said happy people don't need to make other people small. Williams found himself smiling despite the situation. He sounds wise. He is. He's got all these sayings that sound simple but aren't. Like when I was stressed about exams, he told me tests measure what you remember, not what you know. When a friend betrayed me, he said trust is like toilet paper. Once it's used, it's used. That's actually brilliant, Williams admitted, and disgusting, but brilliant. That's John. Jane stabbed at her pad thai. He makes minimum wage and wears the same 5 polo shirts on rotation, but he's richer than you in all the ways that actually matter. The words should have felt like an attack, but Williams heard them as the observation they were. This man, this custodian his daughter had befriended, had given her something Williams's billions couldn't buy: attention, wisdom, presence. The realization was humbling in a way Williams hadn't experienced since his early career, when he'd been the one scrambling to prove his worth. "I want to meet him," Williams said suddenly. Jane looked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because anyone who's had this much impact on my daughter's life is someone I should know. And because—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because maybe I need to learn from someone who knows how to show up." "You're serious?" "When have you ever known me to not be serious?" Williams tried for levity and was rewarded with a small smile from Jane. "Fair point. You're the most serious person I've ever met. John's the opposite. He laughs at everything, even when things are hard. Especially when things are hard." They ate in silence for a few minutes, but it was different now, less strained, like they were learning how to exist in the same space without the awkwardness of strangers forced together. "I'm sorry," Williams said finally, "for missing your birthday, for missing your recitals and parent-teacher conferences, and probably 1,000 other things I should have been there for. I don't have a good excuse. I just got lost in building something I thought mattered more than it actually does." Jane set down her fork. "What matters to you, Dad? Really?" The question deserved honesty. "For a long time, I would have said success, winning, being the best at what I do. But sitting here with you having this conversation I've been avoiding for years, I think what matters is not being the kind of father who gets compared unfavorably to a custodian by his own daughter." "To be fair," Jane said with a ghost of a smile, "John sets a pretty high bar. Then I should probably start raising mine." Jane looked at him with something that might have been the beginning of hope, cautious and fragile, but there. "Does this mean you're actually going to try? Because I can't do this if you're just going to disappear again. I'd rather know where I stand than get my hopes up for nothing." Williams thought about his calendar, packed solid for the next 3 months. He thought about the deals waiting for his signature, the meetings that would be annoyed by his absence, the opportunities that might slip away if he wasn't constantly vigilant. Then he thought about his daughter, 14 years old, brave enough to demand better from him. "I'm going to try," he promised. "I'll probably mess up. I'll definitely disappoint you sometimes because I'm human and humans are imperfect. But I'm going to try. Starting now. Now as in right now. Right now. So tell me, what's actually going on in your life? What are you interested in? Who are your friends? What makes you happy?" Jane blinked, clearly not expecting the interrogation. Then slowly, carefully, like someone testing ice to see if it'll hold their weight, she started talking. About her classes, about the book she was reading, about how she'd started learning guitar from YouTube videos because she was too embarrassed to ask for lessons. And Williams listened. Really listened. Not checking his phone, not thinking about work, just present. It was harder than he expected. It was also better. The next morning, Williams did something he hadn't done in approximately 7 years. He had breakfast with his daughter. Not the kind of breakfast where they happened to be in the kitchen at the same time and exchanged grunts before going their separate ways, but actual breakfast. Together, with conversation. Jane came into the kitchen at 7:15 a.m. to find her father already there, still in his pajamas, silk, monogrammed, probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, standing at the stove with a spatula in his hand and a look of intense concentration on his face. "Are you cooking?" Jane asked, unable to hide her shock. "I'm attempting to cook," Williams corrected, flipping what might generously be called an omelette, but looked more like scrambled eggs that had failed to scatter. "Your eggs scrambled, right? Not too wet?" Jane froze. "How did you know that?" "You told me last night. About John's daughter." Williams slid the eggs onto a plate with more confidence than they deserved. "I figured if a custodian making $12 an hour knows how his daughter likes her eggs, a billionaire should at least make the effort to remember." Jane sat down at the island, looking at the plate like it might be a hallucination. The eggs were slightly overcooked and definitely too dry, but they were there. Her father had made them. Her father, who had a private chef on call 24 hours a day, had personally cooked her breakfast. "They're perfect," she lied, taking a bite. "They're terrible," William said, but he was smiling. "But they're a start." They ate together, and Williams asked about her day ahead. Jane told him about her English essay on The Great Gatsby, ironic, given that her father basically was a modern-day Gatsby, throwing money at problems while missing the point of what actually mattered. She told him about her friend Christina, who was going through a rough time because her parents were divorcing. She told him small things, testing whether he was really paying attention or just performing interest. He was paying attention. At 7:45, Gerald arrived to drive Jane to school. Williams walked her to the elevator, his bare feet on the cold marble floor, still in his pajamas, like a normal dad seeing his kid off to school. "I'll be home for dinner tonight," he said. "If that's okay with you." "2 nights in a row? Won't the stock market collapse without you?" "The stock market managed fine before I existed. It'll survive my absence." Williams hesitated, then added, "I was thinking maybe this weekend we could do something. Together. If you're free." Jane felt that dangerous hope flutter in her chest again. "Like what?" "I don't know. What do you like to do?" The question was so absurd, the fact that her father didn't know what she liked to do, that Jane almost laughed. But she also recognized it as genuine. He really didn't know. He was asking. "There's a guitar shop in Brooklyn I've been wanting to check out," she said carefully. "They have vintage instruments and offer lessons. Then that's what we'll do. Saturday morning." "You're serious?" "I'm serious." Williams pressed the elevator button for her. "I'm also terrified I'm going to mess this up, but I'm serious." Jane stepped into the elevator, then turned back to face her father. "Dad, the eggs really were terrible, but thank you for making them." Williams laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was so unfamiliar that Jane found herself smiling as the elevator doors closed. At Whitmore Academy, Jane found John in his usual spot during her free period, mopping the hallway outside the library. She'd been looking forward to telling him about last night, about her father actually showing up, actually trying. John would appreciate it in a way her friends wouldn't understand. "Well, look who's glowing," John said as she approached, his mop never breaking rhythm. "Either you found $20 or something good happened." "My dad came home for dinner last night," Jane said, unable to keep the smile off her face. "We actually talked, like really talked. And this morning he made me breakfast. It was awful, but he made it." John stopped mopping, which Jane had learned was his version of a standing ovation. "Now that's what I'm talking about. See? I told you not to give up on him." "You were right. I mean, I don't know if it'll last. He could disappear again tomorrow. But for right now, it feels like maybe he's actually trying. That's all any of us can do. Try. And when we mess up, try again." John leaned on his mop handle. "Your daddy's probably scared, you know. Men like him, they're used to being good at everything. Being a father when you haven't been practicing, that's humbling. Give him grace when he stumbles." "I will," Jane promised. Then, because John had become someone she trusted with the truth, "I told him about you." "Oh, yeah. What did you tell him?" "That you're wiser than he is, richer than he is in the ways that matter. That you show up for your kids and he doesn't show up for his." Jane winced. Sorry, that sounds harsh when I say it out loud. But John just laughed, that deep, genuine laugh that made other people want to laugh with him. Truth ain't harsh, it just is. What did he say? He wants to meet you. This clearly surprised John. His eyebrows rose, disappearing under the edge of his Whitmore Academy maintenance cap. The billionaire wants to meet the janitor. That's a plot twist. He said anyone who's had this much impact on me is someone he should know, and that maybe he needs to learn from someone who knows how to show up. Jane shifted her backpack. Would you be okay with that? Meeting him. John considered this, his expression thoughtful. You know what? Yeah, I would. Always interesting to meet someone from a different world. Plus, I want to look him in the eye and see if he's serious about being a better father to you. You deserve that. You'd really do that for me? Jane, I'd do a lot of things for you. You're a good kid in a world that tries hard to make good kids cynical. If meeting your daddy helps keep you from becoming cynical, then consider it done. Before Jane could respond, Victoria Ashford Prescott appeared, flanked by her usual entourage of followers who laughed at her jokes whether they were funny or not. Victoria's eyes landed on Jane and John, and her expression soured like milk left in the sun. Still hanging out with the janitorial staff, Jane? That's so quaint. Victoria's voice carried that particular edge of someone who'd been practicing their insults. My father says people are defined by the company they keep. So what does that make you? Jane felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with Victoria's presence. But before she could respond, John spoke up, his voice mild but carrying an edge that made Victoria's entourage step back slightly. You know what's interesting, Miss Victoria? Your daddy says people are defined by the company they keep, but here you are, surrounded by folks who only like you because they're scared of you. That's not company, that's hostages. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Jane here chooses to talk to me because she wants to, not because she's afraid. So yeah, I'd say she's defined pretty well by that choice. Victoria's face flushed red. My father could have you fired with one phone call. Maybe so, but he'd have to live knowing he's raised a daughter who threatens people for being kind. I feel bad for him, carrying that around. John picked up his mop again. Now if you'll excuse me, I've got floors to clean, real work for real people. Victoria stormed off, her followers scurrying behind her like ducklings following a very angry duck. Jane watched them go, then turned to John with wide eyes. You just destroyed her. No, I just told her the truth. She destroyed herself by being who she is. John resumed his mopping. Listen, Jane. You're going to meet a lot of Victorias in life. People who measure worth by wealth, who confuse cruelty with confidence. Don't let them make you small. You're better than that. How do you always know what to say? I don't. I just lived long enough to recognize patterns. Mean people stay mean until life teaches them otherwise. Kind people like you, you're going to change the world. Or at least your corner of it. Jane felt tears prick her eyes, which was embarrassing. My dad asked what makes you so special. I should have said you make people feel like they matter. Everyone matters, Jane. I just remind folks of that. John winked. Now get to class before you're late. Can't have my star student getting detention. As Jane walked away, she heard John humming again, Marvin Gaye she'd learned to recognize, and felt grateful for the strange twist of fate that had brought a custodian into her life at exactly the moment she needed him most. She texted her father, John said he'll meet you. When are you free? The response came back surprisingly fast. This Saturday? After the guitar shop? I'll make time. I'll make time. 3 words her father had never said before. 3 words that meant maybe, just maybe, things really were changing. Jane smiled at her phone, allowed herself that dangerous hope for just a moment longer, and headed to her English class to discuss Gatsby's impossible dreams. The irony wasn't lost on her. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that made New York City look like it belonged on a postcard. Williams woke up at 6 a.m. out of habit, checked his phone reflexively, then made a conscious decision to put it away. Today wasn't about markets or mergers. Today was about his daughter and a guitar shop in Brooklyn. He'd called Michelle on Friday to clear his entire Saturday, a move that had caused her to ask if he was feeling well. Perfectly well, he'd told her, I'm just trying to be a father instead of an ATM machine." Michelle had gone quiet for a moment, then said softly, "It's about time, Mr. Brooke." Now, standing in front of his closet full of Tom Ford suits and Hermes ties, Williams realized he had no idea what one wore to a guitar shop in Brooklyn. Did Billionaire'S even go to Brooklyn? He settled on jeans, designer, but still jeans, and a simple sweater. Looking at himself in the mirror, he barely recognized the man staring back. When had he last worn jeans? When had he last done anything that didn't involve a boardroom or a business deal? Jane was already in the kitchen when he came down, dressed in ripped jeans and an oversized flannel shirt that made her look simultaneously 14 and 40. She looked up from her cereal, did a double take at her father's casual attire, and grinned. "Who are you, and what have you done with Williams Brooke?" "Very funny. I can dress casually." "Can you, though, because those jeans probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment?" She wasn't wrong, but Williams decided to take it as teasing rather than criticism. This was what normal fathers and daughters did, right? They joked with each other. They were comfortable. "Ready to go?" he asked. "Gerald's probably having a heart attack that we're making him drive to Brooklyn." "Gerald doesn't know we're going. I'm driving." Jane's spoon clattered into her bowl. "You're driving like yourself in a car?" "I do know how to drive, Jane. I just usually don't because it's inefficient." Williams grabbed his keys he couldn't remember the last time he'd used, from the drawer where they'd been gathering dust. "But I figured today should be different." They took the elevator down to the private garage where Williams's collection of cars sat like expensive sculptures. He had a Bentley, a Tesla, a vintage Porsche he'd bought at auction and never driven. Jane walked past all of them and stopped at the oldest vehicle in the garage, a 2015 Audi sedan that looked almost pedestrian next to its flashier neighbors. "This one," she said. "That's my old car. I barely drive it." "Exactly. The others are trying too hard. This one's just a car." Williams felt an unexpected rush of affection for his daughter. She was right. Today wasn't about showing off. Today was about showing up. The drive to Brooklyn was an adventure in remembering how traffic worked, how other drivers were unpredictable and occasionally insane, and how much the city had changed since he'd last navigated it himself. Jane acted as co-pilot, pulling up directions on her phone and occasionally grabbing the door handle when Williams cut across lanes a bit too aggressively. "Maybe we should have brought Gerald," she said after a particularly close call with a delivery truck. "I'm just rusty like riding a bike." Bikes don't have blind spots and homicidal taxi drivers. But she was smiling, and so was Williams, and somehow the near-death experience felt bonding. The guitar shop was called Six String Dreams, and looked exactly like what Williams imagined a Brooklyn guitar shop would look like. Vintage neon sign, window display full of instruments that ranged from pristine to deliberately distressed, and a door covered in stickers from bands he'd never heard of. Inside it smelled like wood and old leather, and something Williams couldn't quite identify, but that felt artistic. Guitars lined every wall, hung from the ceiling, sat in corners like waiting friends. A man in his 60s with a grey ponytail and fingers that looked like they'd forgotten more about music than most people would ever know, looked up from behind the counter. "Help you, folks?" he asked, his voice carrying the rasp of someone who'd probably sung in 1,000 dive bars. "My daughter's interested in learning guitar," Williams said, feeling oddly out of place. This wasn't his world. These weren't his people. But Jane's eyes were bright with interest, and that made it worth the discomfort. "First-time player or experienced?" the man asked Jane directly, which Williams appreciated. He was talking to her, not through Williams. "First time with a real teacher," Jane admitted. "I've been teaching myself from YouTube." "YouTube's great for basics, terrible for form. I'm Ray." He held out a calloused hand that Jane shook without hesitation. "Let's see what we're working with. Grab that acoustic over there, the Martin. Let's hear what YouTube taught you." What followed was 30 minutes of Jane playing, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, while Ray offered corrections and encouragement. Williams sat on a worn couch in the corner, surrounded by vintage amplifiers and concert posters, watching his daughter do something he'd never seen her do before, be truly unself-consciously happy. She wasn't great. Her fingers fumbled, she missed chords, she apologized constantly. But Ray waved off each apology with a, "That's what learning is, kid," making mistakes louder until they become music. Williams found himself thinking about John's philosophy, how showing up mattered more than grand gestures. Here he was, in a guitar shop that probably didn't see many billionaires, watching his daughter learn something that had nothing to do with the legacy he was building or the empire he commanded, and it felt more important than any deal he'd closed. "Your daughter's got good instincts," Ray said to Williams, after Jane had finished playing a simplified version of Wonderwall that sounded like Wonderwall's younger, less coordinated cousin. "She needs proper technique, but the feeling's there. That's what matters." "She's talented," Williams said, because he felt like he should say something. "She's interested. That's better than talented. Talented people quit when it gets hard. Interested people keep going." Ray looked at Jane. "You want to sign up for weekly lessons? I've got a Thursday afternoon slot opening up." Jane looked at her father, and Williams saw the question in her eyes. "Would you remember to make sure I get here? Would you follow through?" "Thursday afternoons work perfectly," Williams said firmly. "I'll make sure she's here." "You driving her?" Ray asked, "if that's what it takes." Ray nodded, like Williams had passed some test he didn't know he was taking. Good man. Most parents just throw money at their kids' interests without actually participating. The ones who show up? Those are the ones whose kids stick with it. After they'd arranged the lessons and Jane had reluctantly put down the guitar she'd been playing, they left the shop. Williams felt lighter somehow, like he'd done something right for once. Jane was chattering about chord progressions and calluses. Apparently, she'd need to develop calluses on her fingertips, which sounded painful, but she seemed excited about it. "Thank you," she said as they walked back to the car. "Really, thank you for bringing me here." "Thank you for letting me," Williams replied. "I should have been doing this all along." "Yeah, you should have, but you're doing it now. That counts for something." They drove to a diner Ray had recommended, the kind of place that served breakfast all day and where the coffee came in chipped mugs that had been refilled 1,000 times. Williams ordered pancakes. Jane got waffles. They sat across from each other in a booth with cracked vinyl seats and talked about nothing important and everything important simultaneously. Jane told him about her classes, about how her history teacher had a tendency to go off on tangents about his time in the Peace Corps, about how she actually liked math when it made sense, but hated it when it felt arbitrary. Williams told her about his early days on Wall Street, about sleeping in his office because he couldn't afford the subway home, about the first big deal he'd closed and how he'd celebrated by buying a slice of pizza. "You? Pizza?" Jane looked skeptical. "I wasn't always a snob," Williams defended. "Success made me a snob. There's a difference." "So you're saying money corrupts?" "I'm saying money reveals. If you're already inclined to be a snob, money gives you the resources to be a bigger one. If you're inclined to be generous, money gives you the resources to help more people." He took a sip of his coffee, which was terrible, but somehow perfect. "I think I forgot that distinction somewhere along the way." "So remember it now," Jane said simply. "It's not that complicated." But it was complicated, Williams thought. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe he just made it complicated to justify his choices. Maybe simplicity, showing up, being present, having breakfast with his daughter in a Brooklyn diner, was actually the answer all along. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again, still ignored, a third time. Jane noticed. "You can check it," she said. "I won't be offended." "I know you won't, but I would be." Williams left the phone in his pocket. "Whatever it is can wait. This can't." Jane smiled, and Williams thought that maybe, just maybe, he was finally figuring out what being a father actually meant. After lunch, they drove to Whitmore Academy. It was Saturday, so the building had that particular emptiness that schools get when students aren't there, like a theater between performances, waiting for life to return. But John had agreed to meet them, and Williams found himself oddly nervous about it. "He's going to like you," Jane said, as if reading his mind. "How do you know?" "Because John likes everyone. It's kind of his thing. but also because you're trying. That matters to him more than anything else. They found John in the maintenance office, a small room off the main hallway that smelled like cleaning supplies and hard work. He was organizing supplies on metal shelves, moving with the efficient grace of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He turned when they entered, and Williams got his first real look at the man who'd become more of a father figure to his daughter than he had. John Michael was average height, solidly built in the way of men who did physical labor for a living. His polo shirt bore the Whitmore Academy logo, and his work gloves were tucked into his belt. He had kind eyes, Williams noticed, the kind that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which he did immediately upon seeing Jane. "There's my favorite student," John said, giving Jane a side hug that she returned enthusiastically. Then he turned to Williams, and his smile became more measured, more assessing. "And you must be Mr. Brooke." Williams extended his hand. "Williams, please. Mr. Brooke was my father." John's handshake was firm, the grip of a man who had nothing to prove but everything to offer. "John Michael, pleased to meet you." "The pleasure's mine. Jane's told me a lot about you." "Has she now?" John's eyes sparkled with amusement. "Should I be worried?" "She said you're the wisest person she knows and that you're richer than I am in all the ways that actually matter." Williams said it plainly, without defensiveness. She wasn't wrong. John studied Williams for a moment, and Williams felt evaluated in a way he hadn't since his earliest job interviews. This wasn't about wealth or status or connections. This was about character, and Williams wasn't entirely sure he'd passed the test. "Well," John finally said, his expression softening, "anyone who can admit that is already on the right track. Come on, let me show you around. I know you probably toured this place when Jane started, but I'll show you the real Whitmore, the one the fancy brochures don't mention." What followed was a tour unlike any Williams had experienced. John showed them the places students gathered when they needed to be alone, the alcove behind the library, the bench in the courtyard that got afternoon sun. He pointed out the locker that had been dented by 3 generations of students, kicking it in frustration. He showed them the bathroom where someone had written "You Matter" on the wall in Sharpie, and how he'd never cleaned it off because kids needed to read it. "This place is full of privileged kids," John said as they walked. "Most of them got everything money can buy, but money don't buy confidence. It don't buy peace of mind. Some of these kids, they're drowning in opportunities and don't have any idea who they are underneath all the expectations." "Is that how you see Jane?" Williams asked. John looked at Jane, who'd stopped to read some graffiti carved into a wooden bench. "Jane's different. She knows who she is. She just needed someone to remind her that who she is matters more than whose daughter she is." The words hit Williams like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. He'd spent 14 years defining Jane as Williams Brooke's daughter, without ever really knowing Jane herself. They ended up in the cafeteria, sitting at one of the long tables where hundreds of students ate lunch every day. John had brought them coffee from his personal stash, the good stuff, not that cafeteria sludge. And they sat like 3 regular people instead of a billionaire, a custodian, and the girl between them. "Can I ask you something?" Williams said to John. "How do you do it? How do you show up for 3 kids on a custodian's salary?" "Same way anyone does anything, one day at a time, one decision at a time." John sipped his coffee. "People think showing up is about grand gestures. It ain't. It's about the small stuff. It's about remembering your kid likes her eggs scrambled but not too wet. It's about going to the boring school play where she's tree number 3. It's about being consistently present, not occasionally spectacular." "I've been occasionally spectacular," Williams admitted. "Birthday presents worth thousands of dollars, credit cards with no limits, but I wasn't there for the small stuff." "Past tense," John noted. "You said wasn't. That suggests you're planning to be there going forward." "I'm trying. I made her breakfast yesterday. It was terrible." John laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "First time I tried to make my wife breakfast, I set off the smoke alarm and burned eggs I didn't even know could burn. But I kept trying. That's the secret nobody tells you. Being a good parent ain't about being perfect. It's about being present and persistent." Jane had been quiet, listening to the two men talk about her like she was a problem to be solved. Finally, she spoke up. "You know I'm sitting right here, right?" "Of course we do," John said, "but sometimes adults need to talk about the hard stuff without worrying about hurting feelings. You're tough, Jane. You can handle honesty." "I can," she agreed. "So, here's some honesty. This is weird. My dad and my friend, mentor, whatever John is to me, sitting together, talking about me. It's weird and uncomfortable and also kind of nice." "Why nice?" Williams asked. "Because it means you care enough to be uncomfortable. The old you would have sent Michelle with a check and called it handled." Jane looked at her father directly. "But you're here, in the school cafeteria on a Saturday, drinking coffee with a custodian, talking about how to be a better dad. That means something." Williams felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. When had his daughter become so articulate about emotional things? When had she learned to give voice to the complexity of their relationship? And why had he missed all of it? "Your daughter's smart," John said, breaking the moment before it became too heavy. "She gets that from her mother, I assume." "Absolutely from her mother," Williams agreed. "I just provided the stubborn gene." "Stubborn can be good if it's pointed in the right direction," John said. "Stubborn got you to the top of your field. Now you just got to be stubborn about being a good father. Same skill, different application." They talked for another hour, about life, about parenting, about the strange way privilege could be both a blessing and a curse. John told stories about his kids that had Williams laughing genuinely for the first time in months. Jane shared stories about school that Williams had never heard because he'd never asked. And slowly, Williams began to understand what he'd been missing. It wasn't just time with his daughter. It was connection. It was the small moments that added up to a life. It was knowing someone beyond their surface and being known in return. "I should probably get going," John finally said, checking his watch. "Got to pick up my boys from basketball practice. They think they're the next LeBron James. I think they're the next two kids who'll need ice packs and Advil." They walked John out to the parking lot, where his 15-year-old Honda Accord sat next to Williams's Audi, like a study in contrasts. John noticed Williams looking at the cars and grinned. "Your car's nicer," John said. "Your life's richer," Williams replied. "Maybe. Or maybe we're both rich in different ways. You got resources I'll never have. I got peace of mind you're still looking for. Grass ain't greener, it's just different grass." John opened his car door, then paused. "But I'll tell you what, you keep showing up for that girl right there, and you'll find the peace of mind. Money can't buy it, but love can build it." "Thank you," Williams said, "for being there for Jane when I wasn't. Don't thank me. Just be there going forward. That's all the thanks I need." John looked at Jane. "See you Monday, kid. Keep practicing those guitar chords." "I will, thanks, John." As John's Honda pulled away, Williams and Jane stood in the parking lot of Whitmore Academy, watching the car disappear down the tree-lined street. The October sun was starting to set, painting everything in gold and amber. "He's something," Williams said. "He really is," Jane agreed. "I can see why you trust him." "Do you trust him?" Williams considered this. Trust wasn't something he gave easily, but something about John's straightforward honesty, his lack of agenda, his genuine care for Jane. It inspired confidence. "I do," Williams said. "And more importantly, I'm grateful he was here when I wasn't." Jane took her father's hand, something she hadn't done since she was maybe 6 years old, and squeezed it gently. "You're here now," she said. "That's what matters." And for the first time in a very long time, Williams Brooke believed it might actually be true. The following Thursday, Williams did something that would have been unthinkable 3 weeks ago. He left work at 2:30 p.m. to drive Jane to her first official guitar lesson. His partners at Brooke Capital looked at him like he'd announced he was joining a circus. Michelle just smiled and said, "Give her my best." The drive to Brooklyn was easier this time, less terrifying now that Williams remembered how city traffic worked. Jane sat in the passenger seat, nervously tapping her fingers against her thigh in what Williams recognized as finger exercises she'd been practicing all week. "You're going to be great," he said. "You don't know that. I might be terrible. Ray might regret taking me on as a student." "Then you'll be terrible and you'll get better." That's how learning works. Williams glanced at her. When did you become someone who worries about being perfect? Jane was quiet for a moment. I think I've always been that person. When your dad is Williams Brooke, there's this pressure to be exceptional at everything, like being ordinary isn't allowed. The words stung because Williams recognized the truth in them. He'd built an empire on being exceptional, on being the best, on never accepting anything less than perfection. Of course, his daughter had absorbed that pressure. Of course, she'd internalized the idea that ordinary wasn't good enough. I'm sorry, he said. I never meant for you to feel that way. I know you didn't, but intentions and impact aren't the same thing. Jane said it without anger, just as a fact. John taught me that. He said people judge you by your impact, not your intentions. John's right. He's annoyingly right about most things. Jane smiled. He really is. At Six String Dreams, Ray greeted them with the same easy warmth as before. The lesson was an hour of focused work, proper hand positioning, basic chord transitions, the mechanics of making music instead of just noise. Williams sat on the same worn couch, ostensibly reading emails on his phone, but actually watching his daughter learn. She struggled. Her fingers cramped. She got frustrated when her hand wouldn't do what her brain told it to do. But she kept trying, and Ray kept encouraging her with a patience that reminded Williams of John. Good people seem to find Jane, Williams observed when Ray took a water break. Your daughter's the kind of kid good people want to help, Ray replied. She's got no ego about learning, no pretense. Some kids who come in here, especially the rich ones, they think buying an expensive guitar makes them guitarists. Jane knows she's got to earn it. That's probably the only good thing I taught her. Nothing worth having comes easy. You taught her more than that, whether you realize it or not. Ray nodded toward Jane, who was practicing a chord transition with intense concentration. She's got discipline, she's got resilience. Those don't come from nowhere. Williams wanted to believe that, but he wasn't sure. How much of Jane's character came from him, and how much came from sheer determination to be better than her absent father. After the lesson, they grabbed pizza at a place Ray recommended, a hole-in-the-wall joint where the slices were bigger than your head and cost $3. Williams couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten $3 pizza. It was delicious. This is way better than the fancy Italian place you took me to last year, Jane said, cheese dripping down her chin. The one where dinner cost $800? That's the one. This is better. Like, significantly better. Your mother would have agreed with you, Williams said, surprising himself. He didn't talk about Jane's mother often. It hurt too much, even after 8 years. She always said the best food came from places that looked like health code violations. Jane set down her pizza, her expression shifting to something softer. Tell me about her. About Mom. What do you want to know? Anything. Everything. You never talk about her. Williams took a breath. She was right. He'd locked his grief away so completely that he'd also locked away Jane's right to know her mother through his memories. Your mother was fearless, he began. When I met her, I was a junior analyst, making barely enough to survive. She was a teacher in the Bronx, making even less. I was trying to impress her by taking her to expensive restaurants I couldn't afford. She saw right through it and told me to stop being an idiot, Jane laughed. Really? Really? She said if I wanted to impress her, I should be myself instead of pretending to be some Wall Street hotshot I wasn't yet. So our next date was pizza, not unlike this, and walking around Central Park. It cost maybe $10 total, and it was the best date of my life. What else? She was stubborn. God, she was stubborn. When she decided something, nothing could change her mind. She wanted to keep teaching even after I started making real money. Said those kids needed her more than we needed a bigger apartment. Williams felt his eyes sting. She was right, of course. She usually was. Do I remind you of her? Every day. Your stubbornness, your sense of justice, the way you see people, that's all her. The only thing you got from me is my terrible sense of humor and my inability to cook. And your eyes, Jane added. I have your eyes. You have my eyes, Williams agreed. But you have her heart. And between the two, I'd rather you have hers. They ate in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Finally, Jane spoke again. "Is that why you threw yourself into work after she died? Because it was easier than dealing with the grief?" Williams had never expected his 14-year-old daughter to be this perceptive. But then again, she was her mother's daughter. "Probably," he admitted. "Work had clear rules, clear goals, clear measures of success. Grief didn't have any of that. It was messy and painful and unpredictable. So I worked. And I told myself I was doing it for you, to give you the life your mother and I dreamed about. But really, I think I was just running away." From what? From feeling. From the fact that the person I loved most was gone, and I couldn't buy her back, or negotiate her back, or work hard enough to deserve her back. From being a single father who had no idea how to be a father at all. Jane reached across the table and took his hand. "You're figuring it out now." "I'm trying. Some days I think I'm getting better. Other days I think I'm still failing you." "You're not failing me, Dad. You're showing up. That's what John always says. Showing up is 90% of success. The other 10% is just not screwing up too badly while you're there." Williams laughed. "John really does have a saying for everything, doesn't he?" "He really does. It's like living inside a fortune cookie, but the fortunes are actually useful." They finished their pizza and walked back to the car as the Brooklyn evening settled in around them. Williams realized he was happy. Genuinely, simply happy in a way he hadn't been in years. No deals pending, no markets to watch, no empires to build. Just a father and daughter, full of cheap pizza and good conversation. His phone rang as they got to the car. The ringtone indicated it was urgent, the kind of call he'd never ignored before. He sent it to voicemail. "Dad, you can answer that," Jane said. "I know, but right now, I'm with you. Everything else can wait." Jane's expression was complicated. Surprise mixed with gratitude, mixed with something Williams couldn't quite identify. Maybe hope, maybe the beginning of trust. They drove home through Brooklyn traffic, and Williams let Jane control the music. She played him songs he'd never heard by artists he'd never encountered, and he tried to understand what she heard in them. Sometimes he got it, sometimes he didn't, but he listened anyway because that's what parents did. Back at the penthouse, Williams made them both hot chocolate, from scratch, following a recipe he found online, which took 3 tries and resulted in a kitchen that looked like a chocolate bomb had exploded. But the hot chocolate was decent, and the process of making it together was better. "I have a parent-teacher conference coming up," Jane said, as they cleaned up the kitchen disaster. "Next Tuesday at 4. I know you probably can't make it, but I thought I should mention it just in case." "I'll be there," Williams interrupted. "You don't even know if you're free." "I'll make myself free. What's the point of being the boss if I can't occasionally tell everyone else to deal with their own problems for an afternoon?" Williams rinsed a chocolate-covered pot. "I want to be there, Jane. I want to meet your teachers and hear what they have to say about you. I want to know about your life." Jane was quiet for so long that Williams looked over at her. She was crying, not dramatically, just quiet tears sliding down her cheeks. "Hey, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. That's the problem. This is what I've wanted for years, and now that I have it, I'm terrified it's going to disappear again." Williams set down the pot and pulled his daughter into a hug, something he couldn't remember doing in far too long. She was taller than he remembered, her head nearly reaching his shoulder. "I can't promise I'll be perfect," he said into her hair. "I can't promise I won't sometimes mess up or occasionally have to cancel something important. But I can promise I'm not disappearing again. You're stuck with me now, and I'm going to show up even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. That's a promise." Jane hugged him tighter. "Okay. Okay. Okay. I believe you." And somehow those 3 words meant more to Williams Brooke than any deal he'd ever closed. 3 months later, winter had settled over New York City, with the kind of cold that made your bones ache and your breath visible. The holidays were approaching. Thanksgiving just around the corner, Christmas glittering in store windows, the year winding down like a clock running out of time. Williams Brooke sat in his office on the 47th floor, but he wasn't looking at market reports or quarterly projections. He was looking at his calendar, color-coded not by business priorities, but by commitments to Jane. Tuesday afternoons, guitar lessons. Thursday afternoons, Parent time. Saturdays. Adventures. The blue appointments, the everything else, were gone. Everything was either red for critical business or green for Jane. His partners had initially protested the change. You can't just disappear every Tuesday and Thursday, they'd argued. But Williams had been firm. Watch me. And when Brook Capital continued to thrive despite his reduced hours, or perhaps because of them, since a well-rested Williams made better decisions, the protests had faded. Michelle knocked on his door, entering with her tablet and the knowing smile she'd worn a lot lately. Reminder, Jane's winter concert is tonight at 7. You asked me to block out the entire evening. Thank you. Is everything set? Car service, front row seats, and I took the liberty of ordering flowers for after the performance. Nothing too extravagant. Jane specifically said she'd be embarrassed by anything too showy. Williams smiled. His daughter had developed opinions about his gestures, which he took as a sign of their growing relationship. She was comfortable enough now to tell him when he was doing too much, being too much, reverting to his old habits of substituting money for presents. Perfect. Anything else I need to know? Just that you're a good father, Mr. Brooke, in case no one's told you lately. Williams felt unexpected emotion rise in his chest. Thank you, Michelle. That means a lot. After she left, Williams allowed himself a moment of reflection. 3 months ago, he'd been a different person, successful by every conventional measure, but failing at the one thing that actually mattered. Then Jane had been brave enough to demand better. John had been wise enough to show him how, and somehow Williams had been fortunate enough to get a second chance. Not everyone got second chances. He knew that. Life didn't always offer do-overs. The Whitmore Academy Winter Concert was held in the school's auditorium, a space that probably cost more to build than most schools' entire annual budgets. Williams arrived early, settling into his front row seat and watching other parents file in. The usual Whitmore crowd of wealth and influence, people he'd see at charity galas and fundraisers. But tonight, he wasn't here as Williams Brooke the billionaire. He was here as Jane's dad. John Michael appeared from a side door, wearing his maintenance uniform and carrying a toolbox. He spotted Williams and wandered over with that easy grin that had become familiar. Didn't expect to see you here, Williams said. Someone's got to make sure the sound system works. Plus, I like to support the kids. John set down his toolbox. You nervous? Terrified. Is that normal? Completely normal. First time seeing your kid perform? First time being there to see her perform, Williams corrected. Big difference. Huge difference, John agreed. But you're here now. That's what she'll remember. The auditorium filled with families, and the lights dimmed. The concert began with the orchestra, violins and cellos and instruments Williams couldn't name, playing something classical and impressive. Then came the jazz ensemble, the choir, and finally, the individual performances. Jane walked onto the stage with her guitar, the vintage Martin from Ray's shop that Williams had surprised her with last month, and Williams's heart stopped. She looked nervous but determined, settling onto the stool at center stage and adjusting the microphone with trembling hands. Hi, she said, her voice echoing through the auditorium. I'm Jane Brooke, and I've been playing guitar for about 3 months now. My teacher Ray says I'm either brave or crazy to perform this early in my learning, so I guess we'll find out which one is true. Light laughter rippled through the audience. Jane took a breath and began to play. It wasn't perfect. Her fingers fumbled occasionally. She missed a chord transition, and her voice wavered on the high notes. But it was genuine and heartfelt and completely authentically her. She was playing a song Williams didn't recognize, something she'd written herself, about finding your voice and learning to trust it. Williams felt tears on his face and didn't bother wiping them away. This was his daughter, his brilliant, brave, remarkable daughter, standing on a stage and being vulnerable in front of hundreds of people because she'd learned that being real mattered more than being perfect. When she finished, the applause was genuine, not polite, obligatory clapping, but real appreciation. Jane's face lit up with relief and joy, and her eyes immediately found Williams in the front row. He was standing, clapping harder than anyone else, tears still streaming down his face. She smiled at him, a smile that said, "You were here, you showed up, this moment is ours." and Williams felt something click into place in his chest. This was what life was supposed to be about. Not deals or dollars or domination, but moments like this, watching your child become who they were meant to be and being present for it. After the concert, Williams waited outside the auditorium with Michelle's flowers, a simple bouquet of sunflowers, Jane's favorite. Other parents clustered in groups, discussing college prospects and SAT prep, the endless competition that defined Whitmore culture. Jane emerged with her guitar case, still glowing with post-performance adrenaline. When she saw Williams, she ran to him, actually ran like she was 6 years old again, and threw her arms around him. "You came," she said into his shoulder. "Of course I came. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I messed up the bridge. Did you notice? I noticed you were brave enough to get on that stage and share something you created. Everything else is just details." Williams handed her the flowers. "You were incredible. I was okay, but I'll get better." "You will. But even if you don't, even if you decide tomorrow that guitar isn't your thing, I'm still going to be proud of you for trying." Jane pulled back, looking at him with those eyes that were so like his own. "Really?" "Really. You know what John told me? He said the trying is the thing, the success is just a bonus." "John's wisdom strikes again," Jane said with a smile. They walked through the school hallways toward the exit, passing classrooms and lockers and all the spaces that made up Jane's daily life. Williams realized he knew these hallways now. He'd been here enough times over the past 3 months that Whitmore felt familiar instead of foreign. They found John outside, checking the exterior lights that illuminated the school's entrance. He looked up when they approached, his face breaking into that warm smile. "There's our star," John said. "You did good up there, Jane, real good. Thanks, John, for everything. You started all of this. Nah, you and your daddy started it. I just reminded you both that family's worth fighting for." John looked at Williams. "Speaking of which, you keeping your promise? Still showing up?" "Every day," Williams said. "Some days I mess up. Some days work demands more than I want to give it. But I'm there. I'm present. I'm trying." "That's all any of us can do." John extended his hand, and Williams shook it firmly. "You did good too, Williams. Not every man has the courage to change." "I had good teachers," Williams said, looking between John and Jane. "Both of you." They said their goodbyes, and Williams drove Jane home through the city streets, now decorated with early Christmas lights and the promise of approaching holidays. The car was warm, the radio played softly, and Jane hummed along to songs Williams was starting to recognize. "Dad?" Jane said as they pulled into their building's garage. "Yeah?" "Thank you. For showing up. For trying. For being my dad instead of just providing for me. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Not everyone gets one of those." "You want to know something funny?" Jane said. "I used to think John was more of a father to me than you were, and for a while he kind of was. But now I realize he was just keeping the position warm until you figured out how to fill it." Williams felt his throat tighten. "That's a very generous way of looking at it." "Here's the true way of looking at it. John always says there's a difference between someone who fills a gap and someone who's meant to be there. He filled the gap, but you're meant to be there. You're my dad. And now you're actually being my dad, which is all I ever wanted." They sat in the garage for a moment, neither one moving to get out of the car. Outside, the city hummed with its endless energy, but inside the car, there was peace. "I love you, Jane," Williams said. "I don't think I've said that enough over the years, but I do. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I'm sorry it took me so long to show it. I love you too, Dad, and you're showing it now. That's what matters." They went upstairs to the penthouse where Williams made hot chocolate, better than his first attempts, but still not quite right, and they talked about the concert, about school, about Jane's plans for the holidays. It was ordinary and perfect, and exactly what Williams had been missing all these years. Later that night, after Jane had gone to bed, Williams stood at his window overlooking the city. From 47 floors up, the lights stretched endlessly in every direction, a monument to human ambition and achievement. He'd spent 20 years trying to conquer this city, to rise above it, to prove he belonged at the top. But the view from up here, he'd discovered, was lonely. The view from Jane's level, where life happened in guitar lessons and parent-teacher conferences and winter concerts, that was where the real richness lived. His phone buzzed with a text from John. "Proud of both of you. See you next week. J." William smiled and typed back, "Thank you for everything. You changed our lives. W." The response came quickly. "You changed your own lives. I just reminded you. They were worth living." William set down his phone and walked to Jane's room. Her door was slightly ajar and he could see her sleeping peacefully, her guitar propped in the corner, her life spreading out before her with infinite possibility. He'd built an empire worth billions. He'd moved markets and influenced economies. He'd achieved everything he'd set out to achieve. But this, his daughter, safe and happy, and knowing she was loved, this was his greatest success. And it hadn't cost him a fortune. It had just cost him the courage to show up. Williams Brooke closed Jane's door quietly and headed to bed, already looking forward to tomorrow, to Tuesday guitar lessons and Thursday father-daughter time and all the small moments that added up to a life actually lived. He'd been a billionaire for years, but he was only just now learning how to be rich. Have you ever had someone in your life, a teacher, a mentor, a friend, who saw your potential when you couldn't see it yourself? Someone who reminded you what really matters? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the people who change our lives aren't the ones we expect.
Thank you so much for watching this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's even more captivating and full of twists you won't see coming. Go ahead and click the image on your screen right now to watch the next story. You don't want to miss it.